The dark woods stood silent under the pale moonlight. Everyone in the village avoided the forest after sunset, whispering tales of strange voices calling out from its shadows. One evening, Ethan, a young and curious traveler, arrived in the village. He heard the villagers' warnings but brushed them off as mere superstition. A strange old man approached him in the tavern, his voice trembling. "Don't enter the woods at night," he said. "Once you hear the whisper, it will follow you forever." Ethan laughed nervously but felt a chill crawl down his spine. Later that night, Ethan couldn't resist the pull of the mysterious forest. The stories intrigued him too much to ignore. With a lantern in hand, he stepped onto the dark path leading into the woods. The trees seemed to close in around him, their twisted branches casting eerie shadows. As he moved deeper, he felt the air grow colder, and a faint sound echoed in the distance. It was soft, like a whisper, but it sent shivers through his body. Ethan paused and turned around. He thought he heard someone say his name, but no one was there. "Must be the wind," he whispered to himself, trying to stay calm. The deeper he went, the louder the whispers became. They were faint, almost like someone speaking just behind his ear. Ethan called out, "Who's there?" but the only reply was the rustling of leaves. As he walked further, he stumbled upon an old, moss-covered stone. Strange symbols were carved into it, glowing faintly in the moonlight. He felt an overwhelming urge to touch it. As his fingers brushed the cold surface, the whispers grew louder, now sounding like multiple voices speaking all at once. Panic began to creep into his chest, but his curiosity kept him moving forward. He didn't notice the glowing eyes watching him from the shadows. After what felt like hours, Ethan came across a small, broken-down cabin. The door creaked open slightly, as if inviting him in. Against his better judgment, he stepped inside. The air was thick and damp, and the walls were covered in strange markings, similar to the ones on the stone. A faint voice seemed to call him again, but this time it was clearer. It was a soft, pleading voice that said, "Help." Ethan searched the room, but there was no one there. He found an old diary on a dusty table and began to read. The pages were filled with the ramblings of someone who claimed to be trapped in the woods. The whispers. "They won't let me leave it read." Suddenly, a loud knock came from the door. Ethan froze, staring at the empty entrance. When he opened it, there was no one there. But something heavy seemed to be breathing just outside. The whispers were now constant, growing louder with each passing moment. Ethan decided to leave the cabin, but the moment he stepped outside, the forest seemed different. The trees appeared closer, their branches like skeletal hands reaching for him. The moonlight barely pierced through the thick canopy, and he realized he couldn't find the path he had taken earlier. Then he saw a shadowy figure standing between the trees. Its eyes glowed bright, piercing through the darkness. The whispers stopped suddenly, and the figure spoke in a voice that was both calm and menacing. "You should not have come here," Ethan had said. His heart pounded as the figure stepped closer, its form shifting like smoke. Ethan ran, his lantern flickering with every hurried step, but the whispers had returned, now surrounding him from every direction. Ethan tripped and fell near the old stone he had touched earlier. The glowing symbols were brighter now, casting an eerie light around him. The whispers turned into screams, and the shadowy figure appeared again. This time it was clearer, a woman with hollow eyes and a sorrowful expression. "You awakened us," she said softly. "Now you belong to the forest." Terrified, Ethan begged for mercy. The woman's face twisted into anger as she pointed at the stone. "Seal the curse again," she commanded. Desperately, Ethan placed his hand on the stone and repeated the strange words written in the diary. The forest fell silent, and the figure disappeared. But as Ethan found his way back to the village, he realized the whispers were still faintly calling his name. He was free, but not entirely. The curse had marked him forever. Ethan returned to the village, shaken and pale. Though he had escaped the forest, he could still feel its presence lingering around him. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard faint whispers calling his name. He avoided telling the villagers about his experience, fearing they would think he was cursed. However, the strange old man in the tavern noticed the fear in his eyes. "You touched the stone, didn't you?" the old man asked, his voice grave. Ethan froze. I didn't know what it was," he admitted. The old man shook his head. "The mark of the forest stays with you now. You may leave the woods, but it will never leave you." Ethan's heart sank. He could feel an invisible weight pressing on him, as if unseen eyes were watching his every move. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. The whispers grew louder, filling his small room. Shadows danced on the walls, moving even when there was no light. Suddenly, he heard a soft knock at his door. His blood ran cold. Grabbing a lantern, he cautiously opened it, but no one was there. Instead, muddy footprints led from his door back toward the forest. Terrified, Ethan slammed the door shut and barricaded it. But the whispers didn't stop. They were no longer faint, they were angry. His name echoed through the room, accompanied by laughter that didn't sound human. He sat in the corner, clutching the diary he had taken from the... But the more he read, the more he realized the whispers weren't just voices, they were calling him back. Desperate to break the curse, Ethan sought out the old man again. There must be a way to stop this, he begged. The old man sighed. "There is a ritual, but it's dangerous. You must return to the forest and face the source of the whispers." Ethan hesitated, but knew he had no choice. The whispers were driving him mad, and he couldn't live like this. That evening, armed with the diary and a torch, Ethan ventured back into the forest. The air was colder than before, and the whispers greeted him the moment he stepped onto the path. They weren't just sounds, they were voices full of anger and pain. As he reached the glowing stone, he began to chant the words from the diary. The forest seemed to shudder, and the shadows began to gather, forming into figures with hollow eyes. The figures surrounded Ethan. The stone was their prison, and Ethan's touch had set their suffering free. "You can end this," the hollow-eyed woman said. "But it will cost you." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. "What do I have to do?" he asked. The whispers grew louder as the woman stepped closer. "Give us your voice. Without it, the whispers will fade, and we will be at peace." Ethan's heart raced. Could he live without his voice? Or would the curse destroy him first? With tears in his eyes, Ethan agreed. The woman reached out, and as her cold fingers touched his throat, he felt a sharp pain. The whispers stopped suddenly, and the figures began to fade into the shadows. The forest grew silent, as if it had been holding its breath. Ethan tried to speak, but no sound came out. He was free from the whispers, but his voice was gone forever. When Ethan returned to the village, he was a changed man. The old man in the tavern nodded knowingly but said nothing. Though Ethan could never tell his story, the peace in his eyes spoke volumes. He had survived the forgotten whispers of the dark woods, but their memory would stay with him forever. Ethan settled into a quiet life in the village. Without his voice, he relied on gestures and the whispers were gone, but the memories of the dark woods haunted him. He often dreamt of the shadowy figures and the hollow-eyed woman. Though the forest had released him, he felt it still watched him from afar. One day, Ethan noticed strange behavior in the villagers. Some whispered about hearing faint voices in the night. Others avoided the forest altogether, even in daylight. Ethan feared that the curse wasn't fully broken. The forest had taken his voice, but it seemed to have left behind something darker, something that was spreading. Curiosity got the better of Ethan when he saw a group of children playing near the edge of the forest. He ran to stop them, waving his arms and pointing toward the village. The children laughed, thinking he was playing a game. As they ran off, Ethan spotted something unusual on the ground, a trail of small, glowing stones leading into the woods. Ethan hesitated but decided to follow the trail. He stayed close to the edge, avoiding the deeper parts of the forest. The glowing stones led to a clearing he had never seen before. In the center stood a tall, ancient tree with blackened bark, carved into the tree. A chill ran through him as he realized the curse wasn't contained to just the stone, it was rooted in the forest itself. That night, Ethan woke to a familiar sound. The whispers were back, faint but unmistakable. His heart sank as he realized the peace he had sacrificed so much for was temporary. He grabbed the diary and frantically flipped through its pages, hoping to find something he had missed. There was a passage he hadn't noticed before. Written in shaky handwriting, the tree holds the key, but beware its roots run deep. Ethan knew he had to return to the clearing. If the whispers had started again, it meant the curse was still alive. He prepared himself with a lantern, a knife, and the diary. As he stepped out of his house, the whispers seemed to follow him, growing louder with each step toward the forest. The forest felt different this time. The air was heavy, and the shadows seemed to move on their own. Ethan followed the glowing stones back to the clearing, his hands trembling. The ancient tree loomed before him, its black bark almost shimmering under the moonlight. The whispers grew deafening as he approached it. Ethan placed his hand on the tree, feeling its cold surface. The symbols carved into it began to glow, and the whispers turned into agonized screams. A deep, guttural voice echoed from within the tree, "You dare disturb me again." Ethan stumbled back, but he forced himself to stay. He began chanting the words from the diary, his voice trembling, despite the fear gripping his heart. As Ethan chanted, the ground began to shake. The tree's roots twisted and writhed like snakes tearing through the earth. Dark mist poured from the cracks, forming into shadowy figures. The hollow-eyed woman appeared once more, her face twisted in pain. "You cannot stop it," she said. "The curse is older than time itself. You can only contain it." Ethan realized what he had to do. The diary mentioned sealing the curse with a sacrifice. Without hesitation, he cut his palm and pressed his bleeding hand against the tree. The symbols glowed brighter, and the screams turned into a deafening roar. The figures dissolved into mist, and the tree's roots stopped moving. When he regained his strength, he realized something strange. He couldn't feel the forest's presence anymore. The whispers were gone, and the air felt lighter. He had succeeded in sealing the curse, but it had taken more from him than he realized. Ethan had not only lost his voice, but also his memories of his life before entering the forest. The villagers told him his name and his story, but he could no longer remember who he truly was. The forest had taken everything it could from him, leaving him as a shell of the man he once was. Yet, in his heart, he knew the curse was contained for now. The ancient tree stood as a silent guardian, holding the dark secrets of the forgotten whispers. Ethan lived a quiet life, distant from the forest and the village. Though his memories were gone, he felt an unspoken bond with the villagers who supported him. They treated him as a hero, though he couldn't understand why. Ethan spent his days carving wooden figures, a craft that felt oddly familiar, as if from a life he couldn't recall. But the forest was never truly silent. One evening, as Ethan sat outside his small house, he noticed a faint glow at the forest's edge. It was the same eerie light. His heart quickened, and though fear gripped him, curiosity tugged at his soul. Was the forest calling him back, or was it warning him? Ethan ventured cautiously toward the glowing light, his footsteps hesitant. He stopped at the forest's edge and saw a single glowing stone lying on the ground. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. He didn't dare touch it, but as he turned to leave, the whispers returned not loud, but soft and mournful, like a distant cry for help. He froze in place. The whispers didn't feel malevolent this time. They sounded desperate. Ethan shook his head and walked back to the village, but the whispers lingered in his ears. That night, he dreamt of the ancient tree, its black bark cracking and oozing dark mist. The forest's curse wasn't contained, it was breaking free. The next day, strange events began to unfold in the village. Crops withered overnight, animals grew restless, and a thick fog crept in from the forest, blanketing the fields. The villagers grew anxious, and whispers of the forest's curse spread quickly. Though Ethan couldn't speak, his carved figures began to tell a story of the curse returning. The villagers looked to him for guidance, but Ethan was lost. Without his memories, he didn't know how to fight the curse again. The old man from the tavern approached him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "The forest chose you once. It will choose you again," he said. Ethan didn't understand what the man meant, but he felt a heavy weight settle on his heart. That night, Ethan heard a knock on his door. He opened it to find no one there, but a cold wind blew past him, carrying the faint whispers. One whisper was louder than the rest. "Help us," it said, the voice filled with pain and urgency. Ethan grabbed his lantern and diary, his hands trembling. He couldn't ignore the plea, even if it meant facing the forest again. As he entered the woods, the whispers guided him to the ancient tree. Its bark was cracked, and black mist seeped from its roots. A figure emerged from the mist, the hollow-eyed woman. But this time, her expression was softer. "The seal is weakening," she said. "The curse grows stronger. You must finish what you started." Ethan nodded, though fear coursed through him. The woman handed Ethan a small, glowing crystal. "Place this in the heart of the tree," she said. "It will seal the curse forever, but it will demand your essence." Ethan didn't fully understand, but he knew he had no choice. The whispers grew louder as he approached the tree, the ground trembling beneath him. With trembling hands, Ethan pressed the crystal into a deep crack in the tree's bark. The forest erupted in chaos. Shadows swirled, The tree's roots thrashed violently, and the whispers turned into screams. Ethan felt his strength draining, his vision blurring. The crystal began to glow brighter, and the mist was sucked back into the tree. Finally, there was silence. Ethan awoke at dawn, lying at the base of the tree. The forest was calm, its darkness lifted. The tree still stood, but its bark was smooth and free of cracks. Ethan felt lighter, but he also felt hollow. He realized he had given a part of himself to the forest, his essence, his very soul. When he returned to the village, the fog had lifted and life seemed to return to normal. The villagers greeted him with gratitude, but Ethan could no longer feel their warmth. Though he had saved the village and silenced the whispers forever, he was a shadow of his former self, a silent hero who had sacrificed everything to end. The villagers respected him deeply but sensed his growing detachment. He no longer carved figures or tended to his small garden. Instead, he often sat at the edge of the forest, staring into the trees as if waiting for something. The villagers whispered among themselves, wondering if the forest had taken more from him than just his voice and memories. Ethan's hollow gaze unnerved even the bravest among them. But Ethan didn't care. Deep within, he felt the forest still lingered, not as a threat but as a presence tied to his soul. One night, as Ethan sat near his fire, he saw movement in the shadows outside his home. He grabbed his lantern and stepped out cautiously. A hooded figure stood at the edge of the forest. "You've done what many could not," the figure said in a raspy voice. But the forest never forgets its savior. Ethan was startled but remained silent. The figure stepped closer, revealing glowing, golden eyes. "The curse may be sealed, but the forest chose you for a reason. It will always call to you," the figure said before vanishing into the darkness. Ethan couldn't shake the fear. Ethan searched through the diary again, hoping to find answers about the hooded figure. Hidden between the last few pages, he discovered a loose sheet of paper. It was a letter written by the previous guardian of the forest. "The seal demands a keeper," it read. "It cannot stand without one. To protect the world, you must become its guardian." The words sent a chill through Ethan. He realized that his sacrifice wasn't just about ending the curse. By sealing it, he had bound himself to the forest. He wasn't free, he was part of it now. The whispers may have stopped for the village, but in Ethan's mind, they would never truly be gone. The peaceful days didn't last long. Ethan noticed strange occurrences around the village. Animals began avoiding the forest entirely, and plants near the edge wilted unnaturally fast. Though the villagers were unaware, Ethan felt the forest stirring again, as if testing the boundaries of the seal. One evening, Ethan ventured back to the ancient tree. It stood as it always had, but he noticed something different. The crystal he had placed in its bark had dimmed, its glow barely visible. Ethan placed his hand on the tree and felt a surge of energy, a reminder that the forest's power was still alive, waiting for its chance to break free. Ethan knew he had to act. He couldn't let the forest regain its strength, not after everything he had sacrificed. The diary had mentioned rituals to strengthen the seal, but they required energy, life energy. Ethan realized that the price for keeping the seal intact would be his own strength, given bit by bit over time. He sat beneath the tree, closing his eyes and placing his hands on its roots. The whispers returned, faint and distant, but they no longer terrified him. Instead, they felt like old companions. As he chanted the words from the diary, he felt his strength ebb away. He was becoming more a part of the forest with every passing moment. By dawn, Ethan returned to the village weaker than ever. His hair had turned gray and his movements were slow, but his eyes held a quiet determination. The villagers noticed his change and began to fear for him. They offered to help, but Ethan shook his head. This was his burden. Though his body grew frail, his spirit became one with the forest, ensuring that the curse remained sealed. The villagers never forgot his sacrifice, and the dark woods became a place of silent reverence, a reminder of the hero who had given everything to protect them. Ethan's life became a routine of silent vigilance. The villagers rarely saw him now, and when they did, he appeared older than his years. Ethan spent most of his time near the forest, watching its edges and listening to the faint whispers that only he could hear. Though the whispers no longer carried malice, they warned him of the balance he was now tasked to protect. Every day, Ethan felt the forest pulling him closer, its essence mingling with his own. He could no longer distinguish where the forest ended and where he began. One cold evening, Ethan noticed something unusual. A child from the village had wandered dangerously close to the forest. The boy was chasing a glowing butterfly that fluttered just beyond the tree line. Ethan rushed to stop him, but as he reached the boy, he felt a sharp pull from the forest, as if it were trying to reclaim him. The boy stared wide-eyed at Ethan, who gently pushed him back toward the village. "Never return here," Ethan wrote on the ground, as he could no longer speak. The boy nodded fearfully and ran away. Ethan realized that the forest's boundaries were fading, and its power was reaching out further than ever before. The next morning, the villagers awoke to find strange markings etched into their field symbols that no one could decipher. Ethan immediately recognized them as the forest's ancient runes. The markings were a warning, a sign that the seal was weakening faster than expected. Ethan returned to the ancient tree, where the crystal's glow had almost completely faded. He placed his hands on the tree, trying to channel his remaining strength into the seal. The whispers grew louder, and the shadows beneath the tree began to shift. Ethan knew the breach was imminent, and this time he might not be able to stop it. Ethan searched the diary for any clue on how to reinforce the seal one last time. Among the faded pages, he found a final entry written in trembling handwriting to restore the seal. The guardian must merge fully with the forest. There is no return. Ethan didn't hesitate. He had already given so much of himself to protect the village, and he was willing to give everything. As night fell, he returned to the ancient tree. The whispers surrounded him, their tones softer now, almost sorrowful. Ethan knelt before the tree, pressing his hands and forehead against its bark, and began the final ritual. The ritual consumed Ethan entirely. He felt his body growing lighter, his senses sharpening. The whispers turned into a soothing hum, and the shadows danced around him like old friends. Slowly, his physical form began to fade, merging with the tree and the surrounding forest. As Ethan disappeared, the crystal in the tree's bark began to glow brightly once more, radiating warmth and light. The dark mist that had lingered in the forest retreated, and the balance was restored. Ethan was gone, but his presence was everywhere, in the rustling leaves, the gentle wind, and the faint glow of the stones. The villagers noticed the change immediately. The forest no longer felt menacing, it was calm and serene, almost welcoming. Though they never saw Ethan again, they felt his spirit in every corner of the woods. The ancient tree stood tall and strong. Its glowing crystal, stories of Ethan's bravery and dedication were passed down through generations. The villagers honored him by leaving offerings at the forest's edge, whispering their gratitude into the wind. The dark woods were no longer a place of fear, but one of reverence, a living memory of the guardian who had given everything to protect them. Years passed, but the forest remained a sacred place, untouched and revered. The villagers lived in peace, and the once dark woods now flourished with life. Children played at its edge, and the elders told stories of the guardian who had given his soul to protect them. Ethan's name became a legend, a symbol of selflessness. The villagers no longer feared the woods. Instead, they respected it, as they knew it was always watching over them. Ethan's sacrifice had not been in vain. The seal remained strong, but so did the presence of the guardian, felt by all who entered the woods. One evening, a strange sound echoed through the village, a whisper that was neither soft nor familiar. It came from the edge of the woods, and the villagers stood frozen, unsure of its meaning. The whisper seemed to carry a message, but no one could understand it. Elder Mara, the village's wisest member, recognized the sound immediately. "It's Ethan," she whispered. "His spirit still lingers in the woods." The villagers gathered in silence, and Mara spoke softly. "We must remember his legacy, for the forest never forgets those who give their all to protect it." Late one night, a young girl named Iris ventured near the forest, drawn by the strange whisper. She had heard the stories of Ethan, and like the others, she felt a connection to the woods. As she stepped closer, the whisper grew louder, forming words that only she could understand. "Remember me." Iris stood still, her heart racing. She couldn't explain why, but she felt Ethan's presence, his spirit guiding her. The woods around her seemed to pulse with life, the trees bowing slightly as if acknowledging her. "I remember you," she whispered back, feeling the weight of the guardian's sacrifice within her. The next day, Iris shared her experience with the villagers, but many were skeptical. Still, she could not shake the feeling that the forest was speaking to her, calling her to do something. That evening, Iris went back to the edge of the woods, determined to uncover. As she approached the ancient tree, the whisper returned, stronger than before. It wasn't just a voice, it was a feeling, a presence wrapping around her like a warm embrace. The crystal in the tree's bark began to glow once again, its light more vibrant than it had been in years. Iris closed her eyes, and for a brief moment, she saw a figure standing in the shadows. Ethan. The villagers gathered in awe. The following morning, when Iris returned, changed. She spoke of Ethan, of his spirit, and the promise the forest had made to protect them forever. She now understood that she, too, was a part of the forest's legacy, chosen to ensure the balance remained. The village, moved by her words, realized that the cycle of protection had not ended with Ethan. Instead, it had been passed down, ready to embrace a new guardian. Iris accepted her role with quiet grace, knowing that the forest's whispers would guide her as they had guided Ethan. Iris became the new guardian of the woods, and under her watch, the village thrived. The forest remained peaceful, its power strong. Iris often stood at the edge of the forest, feeling Ethan's spirit beside her. The whispers were no longer distant, they were part of her, as they had been part of Ethan. Together they would protect the woods, ensuring its power remained sealed for generations to come. The forest had never truly been forgotten, and neither had Ethan. Iris's connection with the forest deepened as the seasons changed. The whispers that once seemed distant now felt like an extension of her own thoughts. She could hear the trees speak, their branches swaying in rhythm with her heartbeat. It was as if the forest had become part of her soul. One evening, as Iris walked along the familiar path, she felt an intense pull toward the heart of the woods. The wind was calm, but the leaves whispered urgently, as though they were trying to convey something important. She followed the path deeper into the forest, where the light of the setting sun barely touched the ground. The deeper she went, the stronger the pull became. Iris reached the ancient tree where Ethan had made his sacrifice. The tree stood tall, its branches stretching far into the sky, the crystal glowing with a soft light. As she touched the bark, she felt a surge of energy, the same energy that had once filled Ethan. She knew now that this was the true heart of the forest. The whispers became clearer, and she understood what they were telling her. The forest was not just a protector but a living, breathing entity, and it needed her. The ancient magic that held it together was fragile, and she was the new keeper, entrusted with its balance. Iris took a deep breath, ready to face the responsibility that had been passed down to her. As the days went by, Iris continued her journey with the forest, learning from its ancient wisdom. One night, under the full moon, she felt a strange energy surge through her. It was as if the forest was awakening a power deep within her, one that had lain dormant for centuries. She could now communicate with the creatures of the woods, understand the messages hidden in the rustling leaves, and even control the flow of the river that ran through the village. Her powers were growing stronger each day, and with them came a sense of peace. The villagers noticed the change, feeling a shift in the air, as if the forest itself was reaching out to them in kindness. The harvests were plentiful, the rivers clear, and the winds gentle. The village flourished like never before. But with the growing power came an unsettling feeling. One morning, as Iris walked through the woods, she heard a faint, unfamiliar whisper. It was not the gentle hum of the trees or the soft rustle of the leaves, but a harsh, cold voice that seemed to carry with it a warning. "The balance is fragile," the voice echoed, sending a chill down her spine. Iris paused, her heart racing. She had never heard such a voice before. It wasn't from the forest, it was something else, something ancient and dark. She pressed her hand against the tree, hoping to feel the familiar warmth of the forest's energy, but instead she felt a coldness creeping into her bones. Iris rushed back to the village, her mind racing with fear. The whisper. The coldness, it all pointed to something she had feared might one day return. The forest had been calm for so long, but now it felt as if the shadows of the past were rising again. That night, Iris couldn't sleep. The wind howled through the trees, louder than ever before. She stood at the window, watching the dark shapes shift in the forest dot. There was no mistaking it, the darkness was coming back. The shadows that Ethan had kept at bay were no longer content to stay hidden. Iris knew that she had to act quickly, or the balance of the forest would be lost forever. Iris stood before the ancient tree, once more determined to confront the darkness head-on. The crystal, which had always glowed with soft light, now flickered ominously. She could feel the weight of the forest's power surrounding her, but there was an undeniable presence of something sinister trying to break through. Closing her eyes, Iris called upon the forest's ancient magic. She felt the roots of the trees beneath her, the energy of the earth, and the power of the air. The forest was responding, but it was weak. She needed more. She needed the strength of the past guardians. Iris whispered Ethan's name, calling for his spirit to return to guide her through the coming storm. As Iris called Ethan's name, the forest seemed to respond with a deep resonating hum. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and a warm breeze swept through the trees, carrying a familiar, comforting presence. She opened her eyes and saw a faint glow emanating from the heart of the woods. Iris, his voice was calm but filled with strength. You have called upon me when the darkness threatens. I have watched over you, and now you must face it with the courage you have learned. Iris nodded, feeling an overwhelming sense of peace and strength fill her heart. She wasn't alone. The Guardian was with her once again, with Ethan by her side. Iris felt ready to face the shadows. As they moved deeper into the forest, the air grew colder and the darkness grew more intense. The trees seemed to bend, and the whispering winds turned into angry, chilling gusts. The ancient crystal in the tree flickered dangerously, and the voice from before returned, now louder and more forceful. You cannot protect them forever, the voice growled, sending shivers down Iris's spine. The balance is mine to break. Iris stood tall, her feet firmly planted on the ground with Ethan's spirit beside her. No, she said firmly. I will protect this forest and its people. The wind howled in response, but Iris's determination was stronger. They swarmed around her, but Ethan's spirit remained at her side, guiding her with his quiet strength. The crystal in the ancient tree suddenly pulsed with a bright, radiant light, illuminating the entire forest. Focus your energy. Iris, Ethan's voice whispered, urging her on. She closed her eyes and concentrated, feeling the ancient magic of the forest flow through her veins. Her hands glowed with an ethereal light as she reached out, calling upon the strength of the forest to banish the shadows. The figures screeched in pain, retreating into the darkness as the light grew stronger. With a final, powerful burst of energy, Iris sent a wave of light rippling through the forest. The shadows screamed, retreating into the depths of the earth. The forest began to heal, its energy restored, and the trees stood tall once again. The darkness that had threatened the land had been pushed back, and the balance had been reclaimed. Iris stood at the heart of the woods, panting but victorious. The air was calm once more, and the whispers of the trees became soft and soothing again. Ethan's spirit smiled at her, his form slowly beginning to fade. You have done it, Iris, he said, his voice full of pride. The forest is safe, and its guardian will continue to watch over it. It is your time now. With the darkness banished, the forest began to flourish once again. The villagers rejoiced as the land became even more fertile and peaceful. The ancient tree stood proud, its crystal glowing brighter than ever, a symbol of the forest's strength and protection. Iris had not only protected the woods but had also become a beacon of hope for the village. Iris now stood as the true guardian of the forest. The whispers that once guided her were now a part of her very being. She was no longer just a protector, she had become the living embodiment of the woods itself. The villagers, who had once feared the forest, now respected it with reverence, knowing that its guardian was always watching over them. Years passed, and Iris continued to watch over the village and the forest. The whispers of the trees were always with her, guiding her through every decision, every challenge. The village thrived, and the forest remained a place of peace, its magic alive and thriving. The villagers would often tell stories of Iris, the guardian who had saved them all, and the forest that whispered its secrets to her. Some said that the whispers could still be heard on quiet nights, the voice of the forest calling to those who were willing to listen. And deep in the woods, where the ancient tree stood, the spirit of Ethan remained, watching over the guardian he had entrusted with the forest. Iris had spent years protecting the forest and its secrets, but there were still moments when she felt an unease deep within her. One night, as she wandered through the woods, she noticed something strange. The trees seemed to be whispering louder than usual. Their voices, once soft and soothing, were now urgent, as if something was coming. The wind rustled through the leaves, carrying with it a message only Iris could hear. The forest was calling her. She felt the pull deep in her heart, the same pull she had felt when she first arrived in these woods. It was a summons, one that she could not ignore. Iris knew that there was something more to this forest, something even older than the magic she had protected all these years. The forest's whispers became clearer the next day, guiding Iris to a forgotten part of the woods. She passed by trees she had never noticed before, ancient and twisted, their bark covered in moss and vines. The deeper she ventured, the more she felt the presence of something ancient, something older than the forest itself. Suddenly, Iris stumbled upon a clearing where a circle of stones lay, half buried in the earth. In the center of the circle was an altar, covered in symbols she could not understand. The air around her seemed to hum with energy, and the ground beneath her feet felt alive. She realized that this was no ordinary place. It was the heart of the old magic, the magic that had once given the forest its power. As Iris knelt by the altar, she noticed something carved into the stone. The symbols seemed to shift and change before her eyes, and the whispers grew louder. She touched one of the stones, and immediately the air around her grew cold. The voices became frantic, warning her of a darkness even greater than the one she had already faced. The old ones are awakening, the voices whispered in unison. The balance is shifting. The forest will need its true guardian. Once more Iris stood up, heart pounding. She realized that her journey was far from over. The forest had chosen her not just to protect it, but to keep the balance between the ancient powers that had slumbered for so long. Something had been disturbed, and it was now up to Iris to restore the peace once again. As Iris made her way back to the village, she could feel the shift in the air. The winds had changed, and the trees seemed to grow restless. She knew that the darkness was not gone, it was merely lying in wait. The whispers spoke of ancient forces stirring, forces that had been sealed away for centuries. That night, Iris stood in front of the ancient tree, her thoughts heavy with the weight of her new responsibility. She could feel the shadows creeping closer, but she also knew that she had the power to protect the forest. The magic of the woods was hers to command, and with it, she would face whatever challenge came her way. She took a deep breath, ready to confront the unknown, knowing that the forest's fate rested in her hands. The following days were filled with strange occurrences. Animals moved in odd patterns, and the once peaceful river began to churn restlessly. The villagers could sense the change too, their once calm lives now filled with unease. Iris tried to calm their fears, but deep down, she knew that something terrible was coming. One evening, as Iris wandered through the forest, she felt the presence of something watching her. The trees around her creaked and groaned, their branches bending as if they were trying to warn her. Suddenly, the ground beneath her shook, and a deep, menacing growl echoed through the woods. The shadows were closing in, and Iris could feel their power, ancient and unstoppable. The time had come for Iris to face the darkness once and for all. She gathered her strength, standing tall before the heart of the forest. The wind howled around her, but she remained still, her eyes locked on the shadows that seemed to creep from the edges of the woods. The air was thick with tension, and Iris knew that this would be the greatest challenge she had ever faced. With a single breath, she called upon the ancient magic of the forest. The trees responded, their roots growing deep into the earth, their branches reaching high into the sky. The crystal in the heart of the forest began to glow, its light brighter than ever before. The shadows recoiled, but they were not defeated. Iris knew that she had to fight with everything she had. She focused all of her energy into the crystal, calling upon the forest's power to push back the darkness. The ground shook as a surge of magic shot through the woods, and the shadows screamed in defeat, dissolving into the air. The forest was silent. The shadows had faded, but Iris could still feel their presence lingering in the air, like a dark stain that could not be easily erased. The crystal in the heart of the forest had lost its brilliant glow, now dimmed, but still intact. The trees stood tall, their branches swaying gently in the breeze, as though recovering from the fierce battle that had taken place. Iris stood alone in the clearing, breathing heavily, her mind racing. She had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, but the forest had paid a price. The land felt heavier now, as if the balance had been disrupted. The ancient tree's energy was weak, and the whispers had faded into a soft murmur. Iris knew that something was still wrong, but as Iris wandered deeper into the woods, she stumbled upon an old, hidden path. It was overgrown with vines, almost as if it had been deliberately concealed. Curiosity tugged at her, and she decided to follow it. The path led her to a secluded grove, where the air felt different, charged with an unseen energy. At the center of the grove stood an ancient stone tablet, half buried in the earth. She knelt to examine it and found intricate carvings that resembled the symbols she had seen on the altar. This was a place of immense power, one that had been sealed away for generations. As she touched the stone, the whispers returned, louder than ever. The voices spoke urgently, revealing a hidden truth: the darkness that had threatened the forest was only one part of a much larger force. There was another, even older power that had been sealed away, waiting to be awakened. Iris's heart raced as she realized the gravity of the situation. The forest was not just a place of magic, it was the key to something far greater. The ancient tablet revealed that the balance between the old powers was fragile, and if one side were to tip, the consequences would be devastating. The darkness had been driven back, but the true enemy was still out there, hidden in the deepest corners of the forest. The voices spoke once more, their tone filled with sorrow. The time of peace is over. The new guardian must rise, and you, Iris, must find the key to unlock the forest's true potential. Iris stood up, determination in her eyes. She knew that her journey was not over. She had to find the key, whatever it was, and restore the balance before the forest was lost forever. Determined to find the key, Iris embarked on a journey that would take her to the farthest reaches of the forest. The path was treacherous, and the deeper she went, the more the woods seemed to shift around her. The trees, once her allies, now appeared as if they were watching her every move. The air grew thick with mystery, and Iris felt the weight of the forest's secrets pressing down on her. She followed the whispers, hoping they would lead her to the hidden truth. Days passed, and her supplies grew thin, but Iris pressed on. She knew that the fate of the forest and possibly the world rested in. She was getting closer to the truth, but the danger was growing with each step. Iris finally reached a clearing where the air crackled with energy. A large stone arch stood before her, its surface covered in the same symbols she had seen before. This was the entrance to a place of great power, a place where the true key to the forest's future lay hidden. But as she stepped forward, a voice boomed from the archway, blocking her path. "You are not ready," the voice warned. "The trials of the forest will test your resolve." Only the worthy may pass. Iris took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the challenge ahead. She had come this far, and there was no turning back now. She stepped forward, ready to face the trials, knowing that the future of the forest depended on her success. The moment Iris passed through the stone arch, the ground beneath her feet shifted, and she found herself in a vast, shadowy cavern. The air was thick with an eerie fog, and distant echoes seemed to call her name. The first trial had begun. As Iris moved forward, the shadows around her began to shift and twist into dark. Each figure was an embodiment of the fears and doubts Iris had carried with her since she first arrived in the forest. The first figure that appeared before her was a monstrous version of herself, consumed by fear. "You are not strong enough," the figure hissed. "You will fail, just as you always have." Iris's heart raced, but she refused to back down. She took a deep breath, confronting her fear head-on. Iris stood firm, facing the dark version of herself, her mind racing. The creature's words stung, reminding her of every failure and insecurity she had ever faced. It was the manifestation of her deepest fears: fear of failing, fear of losing everything she had fought for. But Iris refused to let the darkness control her. With a deep breath, she focused on the forest's power within her. The ancient magic she had connected with was still there, and it was stronger than any fear. The shadowy figure in front of her wavered for a moment as Iris raised her hand, and the light from the forest's magic began to shine brightly. The creature screeched in agony. Iris's victory over the shadowy version of herself gave her the strength to move forward. But as she continued through the cavern, she felt the air grow colder. The fog around her thickened, and she knew the second trial had begun. This time she was not alone. Figures appeared from the mist, each one familiar to her friends, family, people she had lost. They called to her, their voices filled with sorrow and regret. "Iris, you've abandoned us," one voice whispered, its tone filled with pain. "You've chosen the forest over your family." Iris felt a sharp pang in her chest, but she didn't stop walking. These voices were not real, they were merely illusions created by the trial. She had made her choice to protect the forest, and she would not let guilt distract her now. As the voices grew louder, Iris closed her eyes and let herself remember what truly mattered: the love she had for the people and the forest. She thought of the village, of the generations that had relied on the forest's magic. And she thought of the family she had lost, of the sacrifices they had made. With a determined heart, she spoke to the shadows. "I chose this path not to abandon you, but to protect what we all hold dear. The forest is part of me, just as you are. I will never forget either of you." The shadows began to recede as her words rang true. The mist lifted, and the voices faded, leaving only silence in its wake. Iris had passed the second trial through the power of love and understanding. After the mist cleared, Iris found herself standing at the edge of a vast chasm. On the other side, a glowing crystal hovered in midair, its light calling to her. But between her and the crystal lay an impossible gap, too wide to cross on foot. The third trial was one of trust. She had to trust the forest, trust herself, and trust the magic that flowed through her. She stepped forward, and to her surprise, a narrow bridge of light appeared before her, extending across the chasm. The bridge shimmered, but it was fragile, and Iris could feel its instability. The wind howled around her, trying to throw her off course. But Iris kept her focus, trusting the magic to guide her across. She stepped onto the bridge, every step shaky but unwavering. The forest was with her. She could feel it in every fiber of her being. As Iris reached the other side, the crystal before. To unlock the forest's true power, you must make the final choice. Iris stepped closer, the light of the crystal warming her skin. Before her, a shadowy figure appeared, this time not an enemy but a guide, an ancient guardian of the forest. "You stand at a crossroads," Iris, the figure said. "You must choose. Do you continue to protect the forest, or do you release its power, allowing it to live free once more?" The question was a difficult one, and Iris hesitated. She had spent so much time protecting the forest, but releasing its power could bring a new era of peace. It was a choice between duty and freedom, between control and trust. Iris closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision pressing on her. The forest had given her strength, but it had also shown her the importance of balance. The magic she held in her hands was not just for her, it was for the world to share. The forest was alive, and it needed to grow beyond her protection. With a deep breath, Iris stepped forward and placed her hand on the crystal. "I choose freedom," she whispered. The crystal glowed brightly, and the shadows that had once surrounded it began to dissipate. The forest's magic surged, not just within her, but into the world around her. The trees swayed in a newfound freedom, their branches reaching higher than ever before. The balance had been restored, and Iris knew that the forest would thrive, no longer bound by the past, but free to live and grow. The crystal's glow began to fade, and Iris stepped back, feeling the energy of the forest surge around her. The ground beneath her feet vibrated with life, as if the entire forest had woken from a deep slumber. The trees rustled softly, their leaves shimmering in the moonlight. The whispers, once ominous and haunting, now felt warm, like a welcoming embrace. Iris stood still, letting the power of the forest flow through her. She could feel the ancient magic, the life force of the woods, pulsing through her veins. It was no longer a burden, it was a gift. The forest had chosen to trust her, and now she had to honor that trust. As she looked around, she saw that the world had changed. The air was clearer, the earth richer, and the sky brighter. It was the guardian of the forest, the ancient protector who had remained hidden for centuries. The guardian stepped forward, their presence radiating wisdom and strength. "You have done it," Iris the guardian said, their voice like a melody. "You have freed the forest from the chains of the past. The balance has been restored, and now it is time for the old ways to return." The guardian smiled, their gaze softening as they looked at Iris. "You are no longer just a protector. You are the new guardian of the forest, the one who will watch over it for generations to come." Iris felt a wave of emotions wash over her: pride, relief, and a deep sense of connection with the forest. She had started this journey as a simple traveler, unsure of her place in the world. Now, she was the guardian of the woods, entrusted with the ancient magic and the responsibility of ensuring its survival. The guardian extended their hand, and Iris took it, feeling the power of the forest transfer to her. "You will not be alone," the guardian said. "The forest will guide you, and I will be here whenever you need me." As the days passed, Iris embraced her new role with a sense of purpose. She worked alongside the forest, using her newfound powers to heal the wounded trees, restore the damaged land, and protect the creatures that called the woods home. The village nearby began to prosper again as the forest's magic spread into the farmlands, bringing new life to the crops. The villagers no longer feared the forest, but revered it, seeing it as a source of strength and renewal. Iris had become a symbol of hope, the living embodiment of the forest's ancient power. She would continue to watch over the woods, ensuring that its magic was used wisely and that its balance remained intact. Years passed, and the forest flourished under Iris's care. The dark shadows that had once haunted its depths were now distant memories. The land was peaceful, the trees strong and vibrant, and the creatures that roamed the forest lived without fear. Iris had found her place in the world, a place where she truly belonged. The whispers of the forest had become a soft lullaby, a reminder of the harmony that now existed between nature. Iris often found herself walking through the woods, listening to the gentle song of the trees, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath her feet. The magic was still there, always with her, a constant reminder of the responsibility she carried. One evening, as Iris stood at the edge of the forest, gazing at the setting sun, the guardian appeared once more, this time not as a figure of guidance, but as a companion. "You have done well," Iris the guardian said softly. "The forest is at peace, and you have proven yourself worthy of the role you have taken on." Iris smiled, feeling the weight of the years lift off her shoulders. "I couldn't have done it without the forest's magic, or your guidance." The guardian nodded, their eyes reflecting the stars above. "Remember, you are never truly alone. The forest will always be with you, and its whispers will guide you through the ages." As the guardian faded into the night, Iris felt a sense of calm wash over her. She had become the eternal watcher, the protector of the woods, ensuring that the whispers of the forest would never be forgotten again. Iris stood on a hill, watching the wind dance through the trees, its whispers carrying across the forest like an ancient song. The magic of the woods had grown stronger with each passing day, and Iris could feel it more than ever. It was as though the forest had become a part of her, its heartbeat in sync with her own. As the wind picked up, it seemed to call her name, and Iris turned to find a strange light flickering in the distance. Curious, she followed the light, her footsteps light and steady. The glow led her deep into the woods, to a hidden grove she had never seen before. In the center stood a tree, ancient and wise, its bark shimmering in the moonlight. This tree seemed different from all the others, its presence almost otherworldly. The tree's branches swayed gently, and Iris approached cautiously, drawn by a force she couldn't explain. As she touched its bark, a sudden warmth surged through her, and a voice echoed in her mind. "Iris, the time has come for you to learn the true nature of the forest's magic." The voice was deep and calming, like the rustling of leaves in the wind. Iris closed her eyes, allowing the words to flow through her. "This tree holds the key to the forest's heart," the voice continued. "It has watched over the land for millennia, and now it seeks a new guardian, someone who understands its power, someone who is worthy." Iris felt a deep connection to the tree, and as the voice spoke, memories of her journey flashed before her eyes. She saw herself as a young girl, lost and alone, finding her way into the forest. She saw the trials she had faced, the choices she had made, and the balance she had restored. Everything had led her here, to this very moment. The tree's voice spoke again, now filled with both wisdom and warmth. "You have passed the trials, Iris. You are now ready to embrace the true power of the forest. It is a gift and a responsibility, one that will require patience, wisdom, and courage. Are you ready?" Without hesitation, Iris nodded, knowing that this was her destiny. The tree's branches swayed again, and from within its trunk, a glowing seed emerged, floating towards her. It shimmered with an ethereal light, its warmth filling her heart. The voice of the tree spoke once more. "This seed holds the essence of the forest's magic. It is yours to protect and to grow for as long as you live. Plant it, and it will spread the forest's power far and wide, ensuring its survival for generations to come." With reverence, Iris took the seed in her hands, feeling its power course through her. It was the forest's heart, its very soul. She could feel the weight of its importance, and she knew what she must do. Iris left the grove with the seed in her hands, feeling the forest's energy guiding her every step. She returned to the village, where the people greeted her with smiles, unaware of the great responsibility she now carried. The forest was alive, thriving, and Iris was its protector. That night, Iris planted the seed in the center of the forest, under the watchful eyes of the stars. The moment the seed touched the soil, the ground beneath her feet trembled, and the forest seemed to exhale a sigh of relief. The trees around her grew taller, their leaves rustling with newfound vitality. The magic of the forest was spreading, growing stronger, and Iris knew that it would endure for centuries to come. As the days passed, Iris continued her work, nurturing the forest and ensuring its magic remained protected. She had become one with the land, her every action guided by the whispers of the trees. The village flourished as well, and the bond between the people and the forest grew stronger each day. In the quiet moments, when the wind whispered through the trees, Iris would smile. The forest had become her family, its whispers a constant reminder of the harmony they shared. And as she looked out over the woods, she knew that the forest's legacy would never be forgotten. It would live on through her, through the whispers that would carry on forever. The moon rose high above the forest, casting its silver glow over the land. Iris walked along the winding path, feeling the cool breeze against her skin. The trees whispered softly in the night, their branches swaying gently as if they were alive with secrets. Every step she took felt lighter, as though the forest itself was guiding her. As she reached the heart of the woods, she noticed something unusual. A faint glow appeared ahead, pulsing like a heartbeat. Curiosity sparked within her, and she followed the light deeper into the forest. The glow grew brighter, and soon she found herself standing before a large stone circle. At the center, a glowing crystal sat upon a pedestal, radiating energy. Iris felt drawn to the crystal, its energy calling to her like a beacon. As she stepped closer, she felt a surge of power, raw and untamed. The whispers around her grew louder, and she could almost hear the voices of the ancients. They spoke of times long past, of the forest's secrets and its guardians. The crystal holds the truth of the forest, a voice echoed in her mind. It is the key to understanding the full extent of its power. But beware, for the truth is not always easy to bear. Iris hesitated, knowing that she stood on the edge of something momentous. The crystal's glow flickered, urging her to reach out. With trembling hands, the forest looked different, darker, wilder, and full of unknown creatures. A figure appeared before her, cloaked in shadows. It was the first guardian of the forest, the one who had protected it long before Iris. The figure spoke, their voice distant but clear. "You are not the first to walk this path, Iris. The forest has chosen many guardians throughout history, each one tested and entrusted with its power. But every guardian must face the same challenge: to protect the forest at all costs, even if it means sacrificing everything." The figure's words echoed in Iris's mind as the scene around her shifted. She saw herself standing in the heart of the forest, surrounded by flames. The forest was burning, and the trees cried out in pain. Iris could feel the weight of the decision that lay before her. Would she be able to save the forest, even if it meant losing herself in the process? "The forest will always test its guardians," the figure said, their voice a whisper in the wind. "It will push you to your limits, forcing you to choose between what you love and what you must protect." This is the price of the forest's power. Iris clenched her fists, knowing that this was the trial she had been warned about. She had faced many challenges before, but this would be the ultimate test. Iris stood in silence, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She could see the flames spreading, consuming everything in their path. The trees, the creatures, the very heart of the forest, all were at risk. In her heart, she knew what she had to do. She would give everything to save the forest, even if it meant her own life. With a deep breath, Iris made her choice. She stepped forward into the flames, her body glowing with the magic of the forest. The fire parted as she moved through it, as if the forest itself was protecting her. She reached the center of the blaze, where a dark force was threatening to consume everything. With a final, determined gesture, Iris summoned the full power of the forest. The moment Iris released the forest's power, the flames around her vanished, extinguished by the sheer force of the magic she had summoned. The forest fell silent, and Iris collapsed to her knees, exhausted and drained. She had given everything. "You have passed the final test, Iris," they said, their voice filled with both pride and sorrow. "The forest is safe, and its magic is secure. But remember, every guardian must sacrifice something to protect what they love." Iris nodded weakly, knowing that her journey was far from over. She had saved the forest, but the cost had been high. She would continue to watch over the woods, knowing that the balance would always require a price. Iris woke to find herself lying beneath the stars, the night air cool against her skin. The fire had gone, and the forest was still. Its heartbeat had slowed. Slowly she rose, feeling the weight of her sacrifice. Though exhausted, she was not broken. The magic of the forest was still alive, its power woven into her very being. The ancient tree that had guided her stood nearby, its branches swaying in the wind. A soft whisper filled the air. "You have given everything, Iris. The forest will grow stronger because of your choice. But remember, The forest's magic is not a gift, it is a responsibility. Iris closed. The first light of dawn broke through the trees, casting golden rays across the forest. It felt like a new beginning, a fresh start. Iris looked around, seeing the forest rejuvenated. The trees stood taller, their leaves vibrant and full of life. The creatures of the woods roamed freely, their songs filling the air. With a deep breath, Iris stepped forward, feeling the forest's magic guiding her. The balance had been restored, and the forest was alive once more. She was its protector, and in this moment she understood that her role was not just to guard the woods, but to nurture them, ensuring that their beauty and magic would endure for generations. As the days passed, Iris found herself growing more attuned to the forest's needs. She could feel the pulse of the land beneath her feet, hear the whispers of the trees on the wind. Yet, there was something in the shadows, something that watched her from afar. She often felt the presence of another, hidden deep in the woods, just beyond her reach. One evening, Iris knew the forest had its secrets, some hidden for centuries, others yet to be uncovered, and she was determined to discover them all. That night, Iris found herself standing at the edge of a forgotten path, one she had never noticed before. The trees here were older, their bark cracked and weathered. The path twisted and turned, leading into the heart of the woods. As she followed the path, she could hear faint whispers, like voices from the past. The deeper she went, the clearer the whispers became, and soon Iris could make out words: guardians, choice. Forever the voices seemed to be calling to her, urging her forward. She continued, the path now winding through ancient trees, their roots tangled like a web beneath the ground. She felt a strange pull, as if something ancient was waiting for her at the end. At the end of the path, Iris found a clearing, and in the center stood a figure, cloaked in shadows. The figure's face was hidden, but Iris could feel their presence, ancient and powerful. The figure spoke in a voice that seemed to echo from all corners of the woods. You have walked the path of the guardians, Iris. You are not the first to bear this burden, and you will not be the last. The figure stepped forward, revealing their face. It was a face she knew, one that had appeared to her in dreams. The first guardian. I am the one who came before you, and I chose to protect the forest at great cost. The magic is not meant for one to carry alone. It must be passed on. Again and again, throughout the ages, Iris stood in awe, feeling the weight of the figure's words. The first guardian stepped forward, placing their hand upon Iris's shoulder. It is time, Iris. Time for you to choose your successor, just as I did long ago. The forest's magic must live on, and you are the one to pass it to the next soul worthy of carrying the burden. Iris felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had never imagined that her journey would bring her to this point, that she would one day pass the magic of the forest on to another. But now, with the first guardian's guidance, she understood. The cycle of guardianship was eternal, a bond between the forest and those who protected it. With a final nod, Iris closed her eyes and felt the magic of the forest flow through her, knowing that when the time came, she would be ready to pass the torch. The forest would continue, as it always had, and she would remain its protector for as long as the whispers of the woods called to her. Iris awoke to the sound of birds singing softly in the distance. The forest had healed, and with each new day it grew stronger. She had become one with the woods, the forest's magic flowing through her veins, guiding her every step. but the time had come for her to make a difficult decision. She had to choose the next guardian, someone who could carry the legacy forward. As she walked through the forest, Iris felt a deep sense of gratitude for everything she had learned. The ancient trees, the creatures, the magic, it all held such beauty and power. Yet Iris knew that her journey was reaching its end. She would not be the last guardian of the woods, but she would always remain a part of its story. In the coming days, Iris began to notice subtle changes. The trees whispered to her, guiding her towards someone new. She had sensed this presence before, someone worthy of becoming the next protector of the forest. The whispers were growing louder, and with each passing day, she felt the pull of destiny leading her toward a new beginning. One afternoon, as Iris wandered deeper into the forest, she saw a young woman standing at the edge of the clearing. She was gazing at the ancient trees, her eyes filled with wonder. Iris knew in that moment that this was the one, the new guardian, the next soul to protect the forest's secrets. The young woman turned as Iris approached. She looked at Iris with wide eyes, as if she had been waiting for her all along. "I have felt it," she said softly, "the forest's call. It is as if it has been guiding me here." Iris smiled, a sense of peace filling her heart. "The forest speaks to those who are meant to hear it," she said. "You are the one chosen to carry its magic. You are the new guardian." The young woman nodded, her face serious yet filled with hope. She understood the weight of the responsibility. The forest would be hers to protect, just as it had been Iris's and the generations before them. Iris led the young woman to the heart of the forest, where the glowing crystal still sat upon its pedestal. "This is where it all began," Iris said, her voice gentle. "The forest's magic is stored here. It must be passed on to you now, for you are the next keeper of its secrets." The young woman stepped forward, her hand trembling as she touched the crystal. A wave of energy surged through her, just as it had with Iris. She could feel the forest's power filling her, its whispers becoming clearer in her mind. The burden of the guardian was now hers to carry. Iris watched as the young woman stood tall, the power of the forest flowing through her. She could feel the ancient bond between them, one guardian passing the torch to the next. The young woman's eyes were filled with determination, and Iris knew that she had made the right choice. The forest was in good hands. "It is time for me to go," Iris said, her voice soft but resolute. "But I will always be with you, in the whispers of the trees, in the songs of the wind." The forest will never forget the guardians who came before, and it will never forget you, the young woman nodded, her heart filled with both sadness and hope. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice steady. "I will protect the forest, just as you did." As Iris turned to leave, she felt the weight of her decision. The forest was safe, its magic secure, and the cycle of guard. With one final glance at the forest she had protected, Iris disappeared into the woods, her spirit now part of the trees and the winds. The legacy of the guardians lived on, forever etched in the heart of the forest. And as the forest whispered its secrets to the new guardian, Iris's voice was carried on the wind, a soft reminder that the forest would always be watched over, its magic enduring through the ages. Years passed, and the forest grew even more magnificent under the care of its new guardian. The trees stood taller, their leaves more vibrant, and the animals roamed freely. The whispers of the woods had quieted, but the power was still there, hidden beneath the surface, pulsing with life. The new guardian, now fully attuned to the forest's needs, stood watch over the woods. The forest had become her home, its magic, her strength. And although the old guardian spirit had faded into the wind, her presence was always felt like a soft breath in the breeze. She was always with the forest, watching over it as she had promised. One moonlit night, the new guardian felt an odd sense of unease. It was subtle at first, like a shadow moving at the edge of her vision. But as she wandered deeper into the forest, the feeling grew stronger. Something was stirring in the woods, something old, something forgotten. She followed the feeling through the trees, her senses sharp. She had been the protector of the forest for years, but tonight felt different. The wind seemed to carry strange whispers, and the leaves rustled like a distant voice calling her name. She knew something was coming, something that had been hidden for a long time. The guardian arrived at the heart of the forest, where the ancient tree stood tall, its bark glowing faintly under the moonlight. As she approached, the whispers grew louder, clearer. "You have done well," guardian, a voice said, soft but powerful. "But there is more to the forest than you know." The guardian's heart raced. She knew the voice. It was the whisper of the forgotten magic, the one that had been sealed away long ago. The voice spoke again, this time carrying an urgency. "There is an imbalance in the forest, one that threatens everything you have worked to protect." The guardian's pulse quickened as she stood before the ancient tree. She had always believed she understood the forest's magic, but now she realized there were layers to it that she had never known. The deeper she delved, the more she saw the hidden corners of the forest, where shadows lingered and secrets waited to be uncovered. The whispers spoke of a forgotten power, one that had been locked away by the first guardians to protect the forest from a great darkness. It was an ancient magic, so powerful that it could destroy everything. And now, it was awakening. The whispers guided her to an ancient stone circle deep within the forest, where the trees were thick and the air heavy with the weight of centuries. The ground was covered in moss, and in the center stood a stone pedestal. Atop it lay an orb, glowing with an eerie light. The power within it pulsed with a dark energy that sent a chill down her spine. "Touch it," the whisper urged. "Only the chosen guardian can awaken the truth of the orb." The new guardian hesitated. The power was dangerous, too dangerous to be released. Yet, the whispers were persistent, telling her that the fate of the forest depended on it. She knew what she had to do. With a steady breath, the guardian placed her hand on the orb. The moment she made contact, a surge of power shot through her. Flooding her mind with visions of the past, of the first guardians, of the ancient magic that had been sealed away. She saw the darkness that had once threatened to consume the forest, and the sacrifices made to keep it at bay. But the visions also revealed something else: the forest's power could not remain sealed forever. It had to be released, but only at the right time. And that time was now. The guardian understood that the forest's future depended on her decision. She had to release the forbidden magic, but she would have to face the consequences. The guardian stood frozen, the orb's power still flowing through her. She had felt the weight of the decision, the burden of the forest's fate resting on her shoulders. But there was no turning back now. The forbidden magic had to be released if the forest was to survive. As she closed her eyes, she whispered a prayer to the ancient spirits of the woods, asking for guidance. With one final breath, she called upon the magic, allowing the orb's dark energy to spread through the forest. The trees shuddered, and the air became thick with power, as if the entire forest was holding its breath. As the magic spread, the forest trembled. The once still waters of the hidden lakes began to ripple, and the ground beneath her feet rumbled. The guardian watched in awe and fear as the ancient magic filled every corner of the woods. It was both beautiful and terrifying, like a force of nature that could not be controlled. The whispers became a roar as the forest seemed to awaken in ways it never had before. The trees stretched their limbs higher, the air growing heavier with the newfound power. The guardian knew that the balance had shifted, but she also understood that this was the only way to protect the forest from the impending darkness. The forest stood still after the magic had been released. The air felt different now, heavier, yet strangely peaceful. The guardian gazed around, wondering what would come next. Would the forest be safe, or had she unleashed something far worse than she could have imagined? As the morning sun peeked through the trees, a strange calm settled over the wood. The balance may have been restored, but the forest's future was still uncertain. For days, the guardian kept a close watch over the forest. The trees seemed to have grown taller, their branches intertwining in ways they never had before. The air was thick with magic, and the ground beneath her feet hummed with an ancient energy. But despite the peace, the guardian felt a nagging sense of unease. She had released the forbidden magic to protect the woods, but the whispers of the forest now seemed darker, more urgent. Every night, she could hear them clearly, warning her of something she could not yet understand. There was a price to be paid for meddling with the ancient powers of the forest, and she feared that the true consequences had yet to reveal themselves. One evening, as the guardian walked through the forest, she felt a shift in the air. The shadows seemed deeper, longer, as if the night had suddenly come too early. She could sense a presence, something ancient, something that had been awakened by the release of the forbidden magic. The trees, once protective, now seemed to watch her with wary eyes. The guardian could feel the balance she had worked so hard to restore was beginning to waver once again. She realized that her actions had disturbed something that could not be contained. The forest was not entirely safe, and something darker was stirring. As the guardian ventured deeper into the forest, the feeling of dread grew stronger. The trees whispered urgently now, their voices filled with fear. She could hear the soft rustling of leaves, but it was no longer a comforting sound. It was the rustling of something dark, something hungry. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet cracked, and a cold wind blew through the trees, carrying with it a voice low and menacing. "You have awakened me," the voice whispered, its tone filled with malice. "Now, you must pay the price." The guardian froze, her heart pounding. She had released the forbidden magic, but she had not known what it would awaken. The true darkness had been unleashed, and now it was coming for her in the forest. The voice echoed through the forest, sending a chill down the guardian's spine. It was unlike anything she had ever heard before, low and guttural, filled with an ancient malice that made the trees tremble. The wind howled, carrying the voice farther into the woods. The forest itself seemed to be in agony, as if it was trying to reject the dark force that had been unleashed. The guardian's breath quickened as she stepped back. She knew the danger she had unleashed, but she never imagined it would take this form. The shadows around her grew thicker, swirling as if alive, moving with purpose. The forest was fighting to survive, but the dark force was stronger than anything she had ever faced. The trees began to twist and bend, their branches contorting into shapes that resembled faces. Eyes hollow, empty, and full of despair stared down at her from the gnarled branches. The guardian felt a cold hand of fear tighten around her heart. The magic she had released had not only disturbed the balance, but had also awoken a terrible entity that had lain dormant for centuries. With every step she took, the shadows seemed to follow her, creeping closer. The wind carried the faint whispers of the forgotten spirits, urging her to leave before it was too late. But the guardian knew she couldn't leave. She had to stop the darkness from consuming the forest completely. As she moved deeper into the forest, she could hear the soft, eerie sounds of something following her. It was a slow, deliberate sound like the crunch of dry leaves underfoot, but there was no one there. The shadows shifted around her as if they were alive, watching her every move. She felt a presence in the darkness, a shadow that was not her own. The guardian knew the time had come to face the darkness. She could no longer hide or run from it. Her heart pounded as she reached the center of the forest, where the ancient tree stood. The whispers from the tree were louder now, as if it was calling to her, urging her to finish what she had started. The air grew thick with the scent of earth and decay. She could feel the magic pulsing, the forest itself trembling in fear. At the foot of the ancient tree, the shadows coiled like serpents. The guardian knelt, her hands pressing against the cold. She knew this was no ordinary enemy. It was the heart of the forest's forgotten magic, and it was alive. The darkness began to take form before her eyes, a creature of twisted roots and gnarled limbs, with eyes that burned with fiery hatred. It was the embodiment of the forest's forgotten power, the very force that had once threatened to consume everything. Now it was free, and it was angry. The guardian stood tall, her heart beating faster with every passing moment. She had no choice now but to face the creature she had awakened. The air crackled with tension as the darkness towered over her, its twisted branches reaching out like arms, grasping for her. She could feel the coldness in its touch, a chilling reminder of the evil she had unleashed. With a determined breath, she drew upon every ounce of strength she had left. She called upon the magic of the forest, the same magic that had once protected it. She whispered the ancient words, those spoken by the first guardians. The forest answered her call, the trees bending and the earth trembling beneath her feet. It was a battle of wills, her strength against the ancient evil. The guardian stood firm, her hands glowing with the light of the forest's magic. She could feel the power flowing through her, but it was not enough to defeat the darkness alone. She needed more. With a final, desperate plea, she called upon the spirits of the first guardians, the protectors of the forest. Their voices answered her, filling the air with a light that pierced the darkness. The creature recoiled, its form flickering as if it could not withstand the light. But the guardian knew that in order to truly defeat it, she would have to make a sacrifice. The guardian stood at the heart of the battle, feeling the weight of the forest's magic coursing through her. The darkness recoiled as the light grew brighter, its form faltering as the ancient power of the woods fought back. But deep down, she knew this wouldn't be enough. The darkness was ancient, powerful, and the only way to truly defeat it was to make a choice. She felt the presence of the spirits around her, their ethereal voices whispering warnings of the sacrifice she had to make. There was no turning back. She had awakened this evil, and only through her heart ached, but she knew what had to be done. With trembling hands, the guardian lifted the orb once more, its energy pulsing through her fingertips. The forest around her held its breath, the trees swaying with anticipation. The darkness swirled, sensing her hesitation. It whispered promises of power, tempting her to embrace it, to give in to the magic she had so carefully avoided. But the guardian stood firm, her will stronger than the temptation. She had not come this far to let the darkness consume the forest. She closed her eyes and whispered the final incantation, the one that would call upon the spirits of the forest to bind the evil forever. She could feel the magic stretching, pulling at her very soul. The price was steep, but she was ready to pay it. As the last of the incantation left her lips, a brilliant light erupted from the orb, enveloping the guardian and the darkness in a blinding glow. The air thickened, and the very earth beneath her seemed to shift. The trees groaned, their roots twisting in response to the ancient magic. For a moment it felt as if the entire forest was alive, holding it. The darkness screamed, its form disintegrating in the light, but it fought against the binding magic. The guardian gritted her teeth, feeling the pull of the dark force on her body, trying to tear her apart. Her mind swam with images of the forest, of the creatures and spirits that depended on her. She couldn't let them down, not now, not after all she had sacrificed. The light began to dim, but the struggle was far from over. The creature fought against the binding, its twisted form lashing out with fury. The guardian could feel the strain on her body, the toll of the dark magic trying to break free. Her hands trembled, but she refused to let go. She whispered another incantation, her voice steady despite the pain. The forest responded, the trees leaning in, their roots digging deeper into the earth as if they, too, were part of the battle. The ground trembled, and for a moment it seemed like the entire world was at war. The guardian's vision blurred, her strength faltering, but she held on. The light grew brighter once again, a final surge of magic that overwhelmed the darkness. With one final push, the guardian called upon the last remnants of the forest's magic. The light flared one last time, and the darkness shattered. The forest fell silent. For a long moment, there was nothing but the soft rustling of the wind through the leaves. The creature was gone, and with it, the evil that had once threatened to consume the woods. The guardian collapsed to her knees, exhausted, her breath ragged. The orb fell from her hand, its power spent. She had won, but the victory had come at a great cost. The forest around her was still, the trees standing tall once again, but the peace was fragile. She knew that the balance had been restored, but it was a balance that could only be maintained with vigilance. The forest had been saved, but she would always remember the price of that salvation. As dawn broke over the woods, the guardian slowly rose to her feet. The darkness had been banished, but the forest would never be the same. The air was heavy with the remnants of magic, and the trees seemed to hum with life. It was as if the very soul of the forest had been renewed, reborn from the struggle. But the guardian knew that the forest's healing was far from complete. It would take time for the wounds of the woods to mend and for the spirits to find their peace again. She had saved the forest, but the forest would always carry the scars of the battle. As she turned to leave, she heard a soft whisper on the wind, a reminder of the forgotten magic and the whispers that had guided her through the dark. The woods were safe, for now. The guardian walked through the forest, her steps slow and deliberate. The woods were quiet now, but the peace felt fragile, like a dream that might shatter at any moment. She could still feel the echoes of the battle within her, the heavy weight of the magic she had called upon. It had been a struggle, one that had nearly cost her everything, but the forest was safe, for now. The trees whispered softly in the breeze, their leaves rustling like a secret conversation. It was as if the forest itself was watching her, keeping an eye on its protector. She had saved it, but there was a deep, unspoken understanding between them. The forest knew she would always be its guardian, and in return, it would continue to speak to her in its quiet, mysterious ways. Days passed, and the guardian took her time to heal. She returned to the heart of the forest, where the ancient tree stood, its roots now stronger, deeper in the earth. The dark energy had been expelled, but the damage was not entirely gone. The guardian knelt before the tree, her hands resting lightly on its bark, and felt the pulse of life beneath her fingertips. The tree, a symbol of the forest's strength, was healing, just as she was. She knew it would take years for the scars of the battle to fade. The forest would grow, the creatures would return, and the balance would restore itself. But for now, the guardian stayed close, watching over the land that had been her home for so long. In the silence, she found solace. She was not alone. This forest, these woods were now part of her. They had saved each other. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the guardian heard the whispers once again. Soft, barely audible, they came from deep within the woods. At first, she thought it was only the wind, but the voices were different this time. They were gentle, filled with gratitude. The spirits of the forest, those who had been trapped by the dark magic, were finally at peace. They had been freed by the battle, and now they could rest. The guardian smiled softly, the weight of her duty settling into her heart. The woods were healing, and the whispers would no longer carry the darkness, they would carry the songs of the forest's rebirth. She closed her eyes and listened, allowing herself to be embraced by the harmony of the forest around her. As time passed, the guardian felt more connected to the forest than ever before. She was no longer just its protector, she was part of its soul. The magic that had once been a burden now felt like a blessing, a force she could feel in her bones. It was the heartbeat of the woods pulsing through her veins. The trees, the animals, the very earth beneath her feet, all of it was alive with the same energy. In the stillness of the night, she would often sit beneath the ancient tree, listening to the gentle rustle of the leaves. The forest had changed, and so had she. The battle against the darkness had left its mark, but it had also deepened her bond with the land. She knew now that the forest was not just a place, it was a living, breathing entity that she would protect for as long as she could. One day, while walking along a familiar path, the guardian stumbled upon an old stone circle hidden deep in the forest. She had never seen it before, and yet it felt strangely familiar, as if it had always been there. The stones were covered in ivy and moss, their surfaces worn by time. As she approached, the guardian felt a strange pull and energy that seemed to rise from the very ground beneath her. She knelt before one of the stones, her hand brushing against its surface. The air around her seemed to thicken, and for a moment she heard a voice. It was faint, like a whisper from the past. The voice spoke of ancient secrets, forgotten rituals, and the deep history of the forest. The guardian knew that this was a place of great power, one that had been hidden for centuries. She had been chosen to protect not just the forest, but its secrets as well. The guardian stood before the stone circle, the whispers still echoing in her mind. She knew that the forest was no longer just a place she had sworn to protect. It was her home, her responsibility, and her legacy. The ancient secrets she had uncovered were a reminder of the long history of the woods, and she was now a part of that history. As the days turned into seasons, the guardian continued her watch over the forest. The forest, like all living things, was always changing. But with each new challenge, the guardian grew stronger, more attuned to the heartbeat of the woods. She had become the forest's keeper, its protector, and its heart. One afternoon, as the guardian roamed deeper into the woods, a chill swept through the trees. The wind picked up, and the leaves rustled with an unfamiliar urgency. It was as if the forest itself had sensed something was coming. The guardian paused, her heart pounding. The peaceful days she had known seemed to be slipping away. She looked up, her gaze scanning the canopy, and for a brief moment, she saw a shadow moving swiftly between the trees. The guardian's breath caught in her throat. Something dark was stirring. Something new, something she hadn't prepared for. The forest was calling to her, its whispers growing more urgent. The calm was over, and the storm was approaching. That evening, as the sun set behind the hills, the guardian noticed something strange. Dark marks had appeared on the trees. They looked like burns, as though something had scorched the bark. The marks seemed to spread like vines, climbing higher and higher. It was unnatural. The guardian felt a cold shiver run down her spine as she touched one of the marks. The moment her fingers made contact, a surge of dark energy coursed through her. She gasped and pulled her hand back, the sensation lingering in her veins. This was no ordinary force, it was something ancient, something powerful, and it was spreading throughout the forest. The guardian's worst fears were being realized. The darkness had not been completely banished, it had merely been waiting, biding its time. As the days passed, the marks continued to spread, and the once peaceful forest began to change. The air grew heavier, and the whispers that had once been soft and comforting now sounded strained, full of fear. The guardian spent every waking moment searching for answers, but nothing in her knowledge could explain the dark force that was creeping through the woods. Then, one night, under the glow of the full moon, the guardian heard a voice she hadn't heard in years. It was faint at first, like a distant echo, but then it grew louder, clearer. It was the voice of the spirit that had first warned her about the darkness. The forgotten is returned. You must face it, for it is the source of the dark marks. The guardian's heart sank. The forgotten, an entity so old, so powerful, that even the forest's magic had once been helpless against it. It had been sealed away long ago, but now it was returning, and the forest was once again at risk. Determined to stop the growing darkness, the guardian called upon the spirits of the forest. She ventured deep into the heart of the woods, to the sacred ground where the most powerful spirits rested. She stood before the ancient tree, its bark shimmering with a faint light, and began the ritual to summon the spirits. One by one, the spirits emerged, their forms glowing with ethereal light. They were the protectors of the forest, the ones who had once helped banish the darkness. Together, they formed a circle around the guardian. their voices melding in harmony. The guardian spoke of the dark marks, of the return of the forgotten, and of the danger it posed to the forest and all who lived within it. The spirits listened, their expressions grave. It was clear that they, too, were afraid. But they also knew that the guardian was their only hope. Together they would have to stand against the darkness once more. The guardian felt their power rise, a surge of energy that filled her with a renewed sense of purpose. They would face the forgotten together no matter the cost. The guardian and the spirits gathered under the full moon, ready to perform the ancient ritual that had once sealed the forgotten away. They knew the danger, but they also knew this was the only way to stop the darkness from consuming the woods again. The ritual was old, powerful, and fraught with risk. But the guardian was determined. With the spirit's guidance, she began to chant the incantation, the words of binding flowing from her lips. The ground trembled, and the air crackled with energy as the ritual took hold. The trees bent in response, their roots twisting deeper into the earth. The guardian could feel the dark force fighting against the magic, trying to break free. But she stood firm, her voice steady and strong. She wouldn't let it win. The darkness gathered in front of them, its form taking shape as it rose from the ground. It was the Forgotten, an ancient being of shadow and malice. Its eyes glowed with an eerie light, and its voice was like the wind through dead branches, cold and hollow. The guardian stood before it, her heart pounding. But her resolve unshaken. "You cannot stop me," the Forgotten hissed, its voice like 1,000 whispers. "I am the darkness that was never meant to be sealed away. I will return again and again, for I am eternal." The guardian lifted her staff, her hands steady as she prepared for the final battle. The spirits of the forest gathered behind her, their forms glowing brightly, ready to lend their power. This would be the ultimate test of their strength. The Forgotten may have been ancient, but the forest was not defenseless. Together they would face the darkness together, they would fight for the future of the woods. The Forgotten loomed before the guardian, its dark form shifting like smoke, twisting in the wind. The very air seemed to hold its breath. The guardian raised her staff high, and the spirits of the forest joined her, their luminous energy merging with hers. A surge of power coursed through her, and the battle began. With a roar, the Forgotten lunged forward, sending tendrils of darkness toward the guardian. She dodged quickly, her movements swift, but the darkness was relentless. The spirits, with their ethereal light, shielded her from the worst of it. The guardian struck back, using the power of the forest to send waves of light crashing against the dark figure. The clash between light and dark intensified, the woods trembling with each strike. The guardian could feel the weight of the battle pressing down on her. The Forgotten was powerful, but she knew the forest's magic had the strength to defeat it, if only they could keep fighting. The darkness pressed forward, its form shifting and splintering like 1,000 shadows. "You are weak," it sneered. "The forest is nothing without its people. And once you fall, it will crumble into dust." The guardian's heart faltered for a moment. But then the spirits whispered to her, their voices full of hope. "The forest lives in you. You are its heart in the midst of the battle." The guardian felt a moment of doubt. The Forgotten's words echoed in her mind, and for the briefest second, she questioned whether she could truly protect the forest. She could feel the energy of the spirits waning, the battle taking its toll on them. The darkness seemed endless, its power overwhelming. But just as she began to falter, She heard a sound soft at it was the voices of the forest. The trees, the creatures, the very earth beneath her feet, they were all calling to her, lending her their strength. The guardian took a deep breath, pushing her doubts aside. She was not alone. She would fight with everything she had. With renewed determination, the guardian focused all her energy into the staff. The spirits gathered around her, their forms glowing brighter than ever. Together, they formed a circle of light, pushing back against the darkness. The wind howled around them, and the trees groaned under the pressure, but the guardian stood firm. She could feel the balance shifting. The Forgotten shrieked in fury as the light grew stronger, its form beginning to waver. "This is not over," it hissed, but the guardian knew they were winning. The forest was fighting back, the spirits were at their strongest, and the Forgotten's power was weakening. With one final surge of energy, the guardian thrust the staff forward, sending a wave of light crashing through the darkness. As the light surged forward, the darkness began to unravel, its tendrils dissipating into the air. The Forgotten screamed in rage, its form losing shape, the power that had once been so formidable now crumbling before the guardian's strength. The spirits, glowing with brilliant light, surrounded the guardian, their energy helping to seal the darkness away. The woods began to calm. The wind died down, and the trees stopped groaning. The guardian stood, breathing heavily, but victorious. The Forgotten had been sealed once more, its influence banished from the forest. The darkness receded into the earth, where it would remain for centuries, until the forest needed protection again. The guardian turned to the spirits, gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice soft but full of emotion. The spirits smiled, their forms slowly beginning to fade. "The forest is safe," they said. "You have done well." As the spirits faded into the wind, the guardian stood alone in the quiet woods. The battle was over, and the forest had been saved. The once dark, twisted trees were now alive with color, the air fresh and full of life. The guardian felt a sense of peace settle over her, a quiet joy that the woods would thrive once again. But she knew that this peace was fragile. The Forgotten might one day return, and the forest would need protection again. But for now, the guardian could rest. She had done her part, and the forest was safe. The whispers that once haunted her had finally fallen silent, leaving behind only the soft, comforting sounds of the wind and the trees. The woods would always be her home, and she would be ready when they needed her next. Though the battle had ended, the guardian felt a deep responsibility. The forest, once again at peace, seemed to call out to her in ways she could not explain. The trees swayed gently, their leaves rustling in the breeze, as if whispering their gratitude. The guardian knew, deep in her heart, that she would always protect these woods, and they, in turn, would always protect her. She walked through the forest, her eyes tracing the familiar paths she had once known so well. Each tree, each stone, each creature seemed to have a story to tell. The forest had not just survived, it had flourished. But there was a new energy in the air, a quiet strength, a reminder that she was no longer just a protector, but the new heart of the forest. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a stranger appeared at the edge of the forest. The guardian, who had been walking among the trees, noticed the figure from afar. Cloaked in shadows, the stranger's face was hidden, but there was an unmistakable presence about them. It was as if the stranger had always belonged to the forest. The guardian approached cautiously, her senses heightened. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice firm but not unkind. The stranger slowly turned to face her, their eyes glowing with a strange, otherworldly light. "I am someone who has been watching," the stranger replied softly. "I've seen the forest struggle, and I have come to help." The stranger stepped closer, revealing more of their face. There was something ancient about them, something that suggested they knew the woods like the back of their hand. "The forest is not as safe as it seems," the stranger continued, their voice low and filled with a quiet warning. "Darkness is never truly gone, only hidden." The guardian felt a chill run down her spine. She had thought the battle was over, that the forgotten would never return. But the stranger's words planted a seed of doubt in her mind. "What do you know of this darkness?" she asked, her tone sharp. The stranger's gaze softened, and they spoke with grave seriousness. "I know it is ancient, older than even the forest itself. And I know that it can never be destroyed, only kept at bay. The balance is delicate." The guardian was silent for a moment, taking in the stranger's words. She had always believed that she could protect the forest from anything, that her bond with the spirits was enough to keep the darkness at bay. But now she wasn't so sure. The stranger's eyes narrowed as if sensing her thoughts. "The forest is strong, but so are its enemies. You must prepare for what is to come." With those words, they handed her a small, intricately carved stone. "This," the stranger explained, "will help you protect what you love. Use it wisely." The guardian held the stone in her palm, feeling its warmth. It was pulsing with energy, ancient magic that she had never felt before. The next morning, as the guardian held the stone, the forest seemed to respond. The trees swayed in the wind, their branches stretching high into the sky, and the birds sang louder, their songs echoing through the woods. The stone was powerful, but it also brought a strange sensation, as though the forest itself was awakening something deep within her. She walked deeper into the woods, feeling the vibrations of the forest beneath her feet. The stone seemed to hum in her hand, guiding her towards something she could not yet understand. But the whispers of the forest grew louder in her ears, and she knew the time had come to unlock the full potential of the power that had been given to her. As the guardian stood at the heart of the forest, the wind suddenly shifted, and the sky darkened. A chill ran through the air, and the trees began to groan as if they were in pain. The stone in her hand pulsed rapidly, its energy crackling with power. The guardian's heart raced as a familiar, chilling voice echoed through the woods. "It is time," the voice whispered, deep and hollow. "I have waited long enough." The forgotten had returned. The guardian clenched her fists, feeling the weight of the forest's power surge through her once more. But this time she was not alone. She had the stone, the ancient magic, and the strength of the forest at her side. The final battle was about to begin. The air grew thick with tension as the guardian held the stone tightly, her breath steady. It sent shadows toward her, sharp and deadly, but the guardian deflected them with ease, the power of the forest flowing through her every movement. The battle raged on, light against dark, the very heart of the woods at stake. The forest responded to the guardian's strength. The wind howled around her, its force so powerful that it sent the dark tendrils of the forgotten spiraling back into the depths of the woods. The trees themselves seemed to fight against the darkness, their roots pulling the ground beneath them, locking the forgotten in place. The guardian's voice rang out, clear and strong. "You will not take this forest. Not again." Her words echoed through the woods, and with a burst of energy, the stone in her hand flared brighter than ever. The Forgotten recoiled, but it wasn't enough. The darkness began to crack, its power splintering under the force of the Guardian's will. The Forgotten's grip on the forest was slipping. The Forgotten's form trembled, its dark essence beginning to unravel. With a final, furious roar, the shadowy figure exploded into 1,000 pieces, scattering into the wind. For a brief moment, the forest fell silent, the air heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. But the silence didn't last. A low, guttural laugh echoed through the clearing, coming from the very heart of the forest. The Forgotten had not been destroyed, it had only transformed. The Guardian's eyes widened as the pieces of darkness reassembled, merging into a terrifying new form, one far more powerful than before. The true heart of the Forgotten was revealed, a creature of pure shadow, its eyes glowing with malice and ancient hatred. The Guardian stood her ground, feeling the weight of the situation. The creature before her was a force of pure evil, its power unimaginable. But she was not afraid. She knew that the forest's strength was her own. She had already fought once and won, and now she would face this final trial. The Guardian took a deep breath, steadying herself. She felt the stone in her hand vibrate with energy, guiding her. The forest whispered in her ears, urging her to move. The creature lunged at her, its dark claws reaching for her throat. But with a swift motion, the Guardian held up the stone, releasing a wave of light that slammed into the creature with unrelenting force. The battle was far from over, but now she had the upper hand. The creature writhed under the light, its form struggling to hold itself together. The Guardian knew this was her chance. She pressed forward, every fiber of her being focused on one thing, ending this darkness once and for all. She gathered every ounce of energy within her, pouring the forest's magic into the stone. The winds howled, the trees groaned, and the earth beneath her feet cracked. The stone flared to life, a brilliant beam of light shooting toward the creature. With one last defiant scream, the creature was consumed by the light, its form dissolving into nothingness. The darkness that had plagued the forest was finally gone. The Guardian stood, breathless, her heart pounding, but the forest around her began to calm. The trees no longer trembled, and the sky slowly began to clear. The light from the stone faded, and the forest was at peace once more. The Guardian stood still, gazing at the clearing where the darkness had once been. The air was now peaceful. The forest bathed in soft moonlight. The trees seemed to breathe in unison, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. The night felt different, lighter, freer. The forest had been saved, but the price had been high. She placed the stone carefully back into her pouch, feeling the warmth of its power still lingering. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer to the ancient spirits of the woods. For a brief moment, everything felt perfect, like a quiet lullaby, soothing and still. But she also knew that the forest's peace was fragile. There would always be more darkness to fight, more threats to face. It was a never-ending cycle, but it was a cycle she had chosen to live with. As the guardian walked deeper into the woods, a soft voice reached her ears. She turned quickly, her heart racing. Out of the shadows emerged figures she had not seen in centuries, ancient spirits of the forest, their forms shimmering in the moonlight. Their eyes were kind, yet filled with wisdom. They were the true protectors of the woods, the ones who had kept the balance for generations. "We have been watching," one of them spoke, their voice like a soft wind. "You have done well, young guardian. The forest is safe once more. Thanks to you," the guardian nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I could not have done it alone," she replied. "The forest itself helped me." The spirits smiled in agreement. It is the bond between protector and the forest that keeps it strong. The spirits gathered around the guardian, their presence gentle yet powerful. They placed their hands on her head and shoulders, blessing her with their ancient magic. The warmth of their energy spread through her, filling her with a sense of peace and strength. She felt connected to the forest in a way she had never felt before, as if her very soul was now intertwined with the woods. "You are the heart of the forest now," one of the spirits said softly. "As long as you walk this land, the forest will thrive. But remember, with great power comes great responsibility. Protect the balance, for it is fragile." The guardian nodded, feeling the weight of their words. She had already learned this lesson, but hearing it from the ancient spirits made it all the more real. She would never stop protecting the forest, no matter the cost. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, the guardian stood at the edge of the forest, watching the world awaken. The air was fresh, the earth beneath her feet solid and unyielding. She took a deep breath, knowing that her journey was far from over. The forest would always need her, and she would always be here, standing as its protector. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while she felt ready. The darkness had been defeated, but new challenges would always arise. She was no longer afraid. She was the guardian of the woods, and she would face whatever came next with strength, wisdom, and courage. As the guardian walked further into the forest, she heard the familiar sound of birds singing, their songs filling the air with a sense of joy. The trees, once burdened by darkness, now seemed to stand tall and proud, their branches reaching toward the sky. The leaves rustled in the wind, creating a soft melody that echoed through the woods. It was a song of freedom, of renewal. She paused, listening closely. There was a whisper in the wind, a message from the forest itself. It was not a voice, but a feeling, a promise. The guardian closed her eyes and smiled. She knew that this was the beginning of a new chapter. The forest had been reborn, and with it, so had she. She had proven her strength, and now the woods would flourish under her protection. Her journey was just beginning, but she was ready. As the sun dipped below the horizon once more, casting a warm golden glow over the forest, the guardian stood at the edge of the woods, watching the land she had fought so hard to protect. The forest was peaceful now, but she knew that peace was not a permanent state. There would always be shadows lurking at the edges, waiting for the right moment to strike. But she was not afraid. The forest had chosen her, and she would watch over it for as long as she lived. She had become its protector, its heart, and its soul. The guardian of the dark woods, the keeper of its secrets. And no matter what came next, she would always be ready to face the unknown, to defend the forest from whatever darkness sought to destroy it. The Guardian continued her journey deeper into the heart of the woods, where the trees grew even older and the air thicker with mystery. The sunlight barely reached the forest floor, and the shadows seemed to dance, hiding secrets only the bravest dared to uncover. As she walked, she noticed something unusual, a faint, glowing light in the distance. It was not the moon's reflection, but something else entirely. Intrigued, she followed the light, her steps quiet against the soft moss underfoot. She soon came upon an ancient stone archway, hidden behind a curtain of vines. It was old, even by the forest standards, and looked as though it had been forgotten by time itself. The light emanated from within the arch, pulsing like a heartbeat. The Guardian felt a chill run down her spine, but her curiosity pushed her forward. She stepped through the arch, and the air seemed to shift around her. A new world, unseen by many, lay beyond it. Beyond the stone arch, the forest transformed. The trees were even taller, their bark gleaming with a silvery sheen. Flowers bloomed with colors too vivid to describe, their petals glowing softly in the twilight. The air smelled of sweet nectar and something ancient, like the whispers of forgotten gods. The Guardian stood in awe, unsure if she had crossed into a different realm, or if this was simply a hidden part of the woods. She walked further, her senses heightened by the enchantment that filled the air. It felt as though the very ground she walked on was alive, breathing with a rhythm that matched her own. As she ventured deeper, she felt the presence of something ancient watching her, guiding her. The Guardian paused, listening carefully. She could hear a soft melody, a song carried on the wind, but it was unlike anything she had ever heard. It was a song of the past, of the forest's forgotten stories. The guardian followed the song, which grew louder with each step. It seemed to be coming from a clearing ahead, where the trees parted to reveal a serene pool of water, glowing softly beneath the moon. The surface of the pool rippled with the melody, as if the water itself were singing. She approached cautiously, her heart racing with anticipation. The pool seemed to hold the memories of the forest, its secrets and its tales waiting to be uncovered. She knelt by the water's edge and peered into its depths. To her surprise, the surface of the pool shimmered, showing images from long ago. There were visions of the forest in its prime, of the ancient spirits who had once roamed these lands, and of the first guardian who had protected the woods before her. She saw the battles they had fought, the sacrifices made, and the love the forest had once shared with its protectors. The song echoed louder now, a lullaby from the past. As the guardian watched the visions, a voice spoke from the depths of the pool. "You have found the forgotten realm," the voice said, gentle yet strong. "You are the one chosen to hear the song of the past. It has been waiting for you." The guardian's heart swelled with emotion as she realized that the song was not just a melody, it was a message, a calling from the forest's ancient guardians, urging her to protect its legacy. You are the keeper of this song now, the voice continued. The forest will always need a protector, someone who remembers the past and carries its wisdom into the future. Do not forget the lessons of those who came before you. The guardian nodded, her resolve strengthening. She understood now that her role was more than just a protector, it was to be a storyteller, a keeper of the forest's history, ensuring that its legacy lived on through the ages. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet trembled. The guardian felt a deep shift in the energy around her, and the once serene atmosphere turned heavy with tension. From the shadows of the trees, dark shapes began to emerge. These were no ordinary creatures, they were the remnants of the forest's ancient enemies, the ones who had once threatened the balance of the woods. They had been banished long ago, but something had awakened them from their slumber. The guardian stood tall, her heart steady. She knew what she had to do. She had been chosen not just to protect the forest from the darkness, but to ensure it never returned. As the shadows gathered around her, she whispered the words of an ancient incantation, calling upon the power of the forest itself. The trees responded, their branches stretching high to shield her from the darkness. The guardian's eyes glowed with the light of the pool's song, and the battle for the forest's future began. The guardian stood firm, the darkness closing in around her, but the power of the forest flowed through her veins. The ancient creatures lunged toward her, their eyes burning with malice. But the guardian was not afraid. She had the forest's magic at her side. With a single motion, she raised her hands, and the trees around her roared to life, their branches crashing down upon the shadows. The battle was fierce, but the Guardian's resolve never wavered. The power of the ancient song surged through her, and with one final cry, she called upon the strength of the forest spirit. The shadows shrieked as they were consumed by the light, vanishing into the ether from which they came. The Guardian stood victorious, her breath coming in heavy gasps. The forest was safe, but the cost had been high. She had protected the legacy of the woods, but she knew that this battle was just one of many to come. The forest was eternal, and as long as it called for her, she would answer. The Forgotten's voice echoed again, but this time it was not just a whisper, it was a command, a powerful force that tried to break through her resolve. "You cannot stop me," the Forgotten growled, its presence overwhelming. The trees shook violently, and the ground beneath her feet trembled. But the Guardian stood firm. She could feel the strength of the forest rising within her. She was not just a protector now, she was the heart of the woods. The stone in her hand glowed brightly, casting a radiant light that pierced the surrounding darkness. The Forgotten's dark form wavered, momentarily faltering. The Guardian knew the time had come to face this evil once more, but this time she had the power to truly end it. As the Forgotten advanced, the Guardian raised the stone high above her head. A brilliant beam of light shot from the stone, cutting through the darkness. The Forgotten shrieked in fury, twisting its form to avoid the light, but it was no use. The Guardian's power was too strong. Her connection to the forest had reached its peak. She could feel the ancient magic pulsing through her, joining with the stone's energy to form an unbreakable barrier. The Forgotten's dark form swirled around her, seeking a way to strike. As the sun dipped below the horizon once more, casting a warm golden glow over the forest, the Guardian stood at the edge of the woods, watching the land she had fought so hard to protect. The forest was peaceful now, but she knew that peace was not a permanent state. There would always be shadows lurking at the edges, waiting for the right moment to strike. After the battle, a strange calm settled over the woods. The forest, once again free from the shadows, seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The Guardian stood in the heart of the clearing, her body exhausted but her spirit unbroken. The trees, their leaves shimmering in the moonlight, seemed to whisper a soft thank you. She had fulfilled her duty, but deep down, she knew the peace would not last forever. The Guardian walked slowly through the woods, her footsteps light as if the forest itself was guiding her. She could feel the presence of the ancient spirits watching over her, their silent encouragement comforting her. She knew that the song would live on within her, that the legacy of the forest's protectors would never fade. But the forest was always changing, and it would need a new protector when the time came. She wondered who would take her place when she could no longer walk among the trees. As she journeyed deeper into the forest, the guardian heard something, a faint whisper in the wind. At first she thought it was just the rustling of leaves, but as she listened closer, she realized it was a voice, a call from the woods. It was gentle, yet urgent, and it carried with it a warning. The forest was changing, and something new was stirring beneath the surface. The guardian's heart raced as she tried to make sense of the message. She paused by an ancient oak tree, its bark worn and cracked from centuries of age. The tree had always been a place of solace, its presence grounding her whenever she felt lost. As her hand touched the tree's rough surface, she felt a surge of energy pulse through her. The voice in the wind became clearer, telling her that a new challenge was approaching. The forest was alive, and it was calling her once again to protect it from an unknown danger. The guardian felt the weight of the message settle deep within her chest. She had faced the darkness before, but this time it felt different. The forest was not just a place of beauty, it was a living, breathing entity, and it had its own heartbeat. The storm that was coming was not one of wind and rain, but something far more dangerous, an unseen force that threatened the balance of everything. The guardian knew she could not face this threat alone. She needed to seek out the ancient allies who had once helped the protectors of the woods, spirits of the land, creatures of the forest, and even humans who had once lived in harmony with nature. She gathered her strength, knowing that this would be the greatest challenge she had ever faced. The storm was coming, and she had to be ready. In the heart of the forest, the guardian found the clearing where the ancient ones had once gathered. These beings were older than time itself, and their wisdom was unmatched. They were not creatures of flesh and bone, but spirits who had watched over the woods for millennia. The guardian bowed before them, her heart full of respect. She had come seeking their guidance, knowing that the coming storm would require more than her strength alone. The ancient ones spoke in a language older than the trees, their voices carrying through the air like the whispers of the wind. The storm is not one of nature, they said. It is a force that seeks to tear apart the balance of the world. It has come from beyond the forest, from a place where the darkness grows. The guardian's heart sank. She had faced many challenges, but this was unlike anything she had ever known. The storm was not a mere physical threat, it was a force that could destroy everything. The ancient ones gave the guardian a gift, an amulet carved from the wood of the first tree that had ever grown in the forest. This amulet held the power to protect the woods from the storm, but it would require great sacrifice. The guardian knew what she had to do. She would have to enter the heart of the storm and confront the force that threatened the forest head-on. The path forward was uncertain, but the guardian's resolve was unwavering. She knew that she could not turn back now. The storm was coming, and if she didn't act, everything she had fought for would be lost. She took a deep breath, clutching the amulet tightly in her hand. With one final look at the ancient ones, she stepped into the unknown, ready to face whatever awaited her. As the guardian walked through the woods, the air around her began to shift. The once peaceful forest was now charged with a strange energy, as if it were aware of the coming storm. The leaves rustled with a sound that was not quite natural, and the shadows seemed to grow longer, stretching into the night. She felt a chill run down her spine as the first sign of the storm appeared. It wasn't thunder or rain, but a dark mist that began to creep through the trees. It was thick, almost tangible, and it moved with an eerie purpose. The guardian's grip on the amulet tightened as she pressed forward. She had to face this, no matter how terrifying it seemed. The storm was no longer just a distant threat, it had arrived, and she was the only one who could stop it. The mist thickened around the guardian, swirling and twisting, as though it had a life of its own. It moved in unnatural patterns, as if seeking her, drawn to her presence. The air grew colder, and the trees seemed to retreat, their branches bending away from the creeping fog. With each step she took, the mist seemed to grow denser, enveloping her in a haunting silence. She could barely see a few feet ahead, but she pressed on, determined to reach the heart of the storm. As she walked, the amulet in her hand began to glow faintly, casting a soft light that cut through the darkness. The guardian's heart beat faster, her senses heightened. She knew the storm was not just a physical force, it was something older, something born from the deepest corners of the world's forgotten past. The whispers grew louder in her mind, voices of lost souls warning her of the danger that lay ahead. The mist seemed to carry with it the weight of their warnings, a promise of doom if she failed. Through the thickening fog, the guardian finally reached the center of the storm. It was a clearing unlike any she had ever seen. The trees were twisted and gnarled, their roots rising from the earth like serpents. In the center stood a massive, dark figure, a being that seemed to be made of the very mist itself. It loomed over her, its form shifting and changing with each breath it took. The air around it hummed with a dark energy, and the ground beneath her feet trembled. As she walked, the amulet in her hand began to glow faintly, casting a soft light that cut through the darkness. The guardian's heart beat faster, her senses heightened. She knew the storm was not just a physical force, it was something older, something born from the deepest corners of the world's forgotten past. The whispers grew louder in her mind, voices of lost souls warning her of the danger that lay ahead. The mist seemed to carry with it the weight of their warnings, a promise of doom if she failed. Through the thickening fog, the guardian finally reached the center of the storm. It was a clearing unlike any she had ever seen. The trees were twisted and gnarled, their roots rising from the earth like serpents. In the center stood a massive, dark figure, a being that seemed to be made of the very mist itself. It loomed over her, its form shifting and changing with each breath it took. The air around it hummed with a dark energy, and the ground beneath her feet trembled. The guardian raised the amulet, feeling its power surge through her. The being before her was no mere creature, it was an ancient force of darkness, born from the depths of forgotten legends. It had come to claim the forest, to break the balance that had existed for eons. But the guardian would not let that happen. She stepped forward, her voice steady as she spoke to the creature. "I will protect this forest. I will stop you." The dark figure let out a low, growling sound, its form rippling as it responded to her challenge. "You are nothing," it hissed, its voice a chilling echo that seemed to vibrate through the air. "This forest will fall, and you will fade into nothingness." The guardian's heart pounded, but her resolve only strengthened. She knew she had to fight with every ounce of strength she had. The mist around them swirled violently as the creature lunged toward her. In that moment, the guardian raised the amulet high, and a brilliant light erupted from it, pushing back the dark figure. The creature shrieked in pain, its form flickering. The guardian had no time to waste. She knew this battle would not be won with mere strength alone. It was a battle of wills, and she had to remain steadfast. The light from the amulet began to grow stronger, and she focused all her energy on keeping it alive. The creature recoiled, but the storm was far from over. The battle had only just begun. As the storm raged on, the guardian stood firm, her heart filled with unwavering courage. The battle between light and darkness was far from over, but she knew that she would protect the forest until her last breath. The ancient woods, once again, whispered their gratitude, and the guardian could feel their spirit wrapping around her like a protective embrace. Though the darkness would always return, so too would the light, and as long as she stood, the forest would never be truly forgotten. The wind carried the faintest echo of a whisper, the promise of peace, however fleeting. The guardian closed her eyes, knowing that her journey was far from finished, but her spirit was ready. The woods would always call, and she would always answer.